Welcome to ANN In Depth. I am your host for today, Ruben Covarrubias. I am excited for today's topic and for our two guests that we have with us today. Today, we're going to be discussing religion versus science. This is something that a lot of us in the faith and in the church either tend to discuss and sometimes get into deep discussions, but we have brought some great experts and panelists to discuss this with us. And speaking of that, I want to introduce to all of you who are watching us, first, Rich Aguilera. He is the director of a ministry called One Mustard Seed that we're going to get into a little bit here. Thank you for joining us today, Rich.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate the invitation. Great to be with you guys.
Thank you. Also with us is Dr. Leonard Brand. Dr. Leonard Brand is the professor of biology and paleontology at Loma Linda University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Brand.
I'm going to enjoy this.
Fantastic. Well, I like that energy of we're all going to enjoy this. We're all going to enjoy this. And so I want to start with this question that a lot of us in the church have, and usually we get a little bit nervous when it comes to religion and science. So I'm going to start with you, Rich. Hit us off with what got you interested in this. I understand with your ministry, you talk about evolution. You speak a lot to younger people. So you are an architect by training, and now you do this. You go on around the world talking about this. What got you there, and what brought you that passion of wanting to speak about this?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how God works, right, in mysterious ways sometimes, because we're here talking about religion and science, and I'm neither a pastor or a scientist. Mm-hmm. But here we are because God leads us sometimes to do work for him. I did start in architecture. I did that for about 15 years and just felt a passion for our young people. I always served at church, the young people, the youth, children's church, all that kind of stuff. And finally, I did a whole fleece moment and felt God leading me to start a ministry. So in 2008, started this ministry. We called it One Mustard Seed because starting it was one big leap of faith. Mm. And literally the very first thing that I got involved in was a magazine, which a lot of Adventists are very familiar with, called Guide Magazine for our young people.
Yes.
And I was asked to be the nature columnist and write about nature and creation. I had always been passionate about nature, but creation was kind of an area I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll have to do a little bit of research. And after a few months of immersing myself in the subject, I was really blown away at how urgent this topic was, especially among our young people, to be, more familiar with, better versed in. So I kind of challenged myself to try to figure out how we can get our young people up to speed on this topic, because I think they were a little bit behind, and a lot of them still are.
Wow. Leonard, let me ask you, as a professor in paleontology, there's a lot of times there might be an intersect where religion and we feel science can't go together. And as Rich alluded to, are we behind in this? How do we go with this debate of religion versus science?
That's a very big topic, of course. Yeah. And actually, I guess I prefer, the phrase faith and science.
Yes.
And there's a very big misunderstanding. It's not really a battle between the Bible and science. It's one scientific interpretation versus a different scientific interpretation. And the Bible can give us great insights which can apply directly to our science.
I think the enemy is intentionally trying to pit those two together, so people think that there's two different ideas that are at odds, but it really isn't. I agree with Dr. Brand, of course.
Yeah, Rich, what have you seen in your travels, and when you speak with people, what usually is that thing that is at odds? Why is it so hard for us to put those two together, of religion or faith and science?
Well, if you think about, like I said earlier, I focus mainly on children, and the great majority of church children attend public schools. They watch television, they watch movies, they're completely immersed in the society which teaches a completely anti-God look at the world and how we got here, and evolution and millions of years, and there's no God. It's everywhere. So for the kids that are presented with the faith side, they're believing, maybe because they were brought up that way or whatever, But then at the same time, they're at school being taught a completely different idea. And I've been to events. I did an event. I don't want to say what country or where I was, but I was shocked. I was in this country and I was in charge of a week of prayer for a group of juniors kids, about 100 of them. And I remember, right off the bat, the first day, I took a poll with these kids, all church kids, and I asked them, when did God, create the earth? And they're all like, 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, woohoo! And then I asked them, and when did the dinosaurs live? And they all said, millions of years ago. And I was like, of course, and that kind of set it up for what the challenge was. Literally, all of them did not see at that moment a conflict between believing in the two, when in real life, of course, there's a huge conflict. So that kind of started setting me up early on, being quite aware that in a lot of kids' minds, they don't even see the difference and the conflict between the two ideas.
Yeah, wow, that's startling to think of, that they can have both of those views. Leonard, how do we approach this? With you being a professor, and obviously, and you mentioned there are two scientific interpretations. Is this kind of what Rich just alluded to? Is this kind of what we're talking about, or how in depth, or how not in depth are we as a church not realizing this?
As a church, that's a little hard to say, because you have all kinds of people. There are, I know colleagues who are convinced that the theistic evolution idea is right. God created by evolution over millions of years. I don't know how many believe that. It doesn't seem to be a dominant view, but it certainly is pushed very forcefully from some quarters. But as a church as a whole, I think we're doing much better than we have been sometimes in the past, and in getting our young people to understand at least what is a biblical point of view. I hope that's correct.
I want to continue with that. Leonard, how do we approach, I know for myself, growing up in the church, there was a little bit of hesitation when science would mix with faith or religion. And let's talk a little bit about that. Is there a difference between when we say faith and religion? I'm sorry, faith and versus science and just religion? Because some people say it takes faith to believe in science, or is science helping us with our faith? How do we approach that?
Well, I guess I would think of religion as the institutionalized aspect of the faith. I like the term faith. It's more direct to what I'm thinking about, and it's a very important. Well, how do I address your question directly? The whole world pushes us in one direction, and most scientists think that you can't have faith of any kind and be thinking rationally. Scientists can prove things. Religion has faith, and they never meet. But that's not true. Science and Christianity both rely a lot on faith, much more than most people know.
Wow. What could be a sample of that, or an example of that, of like, because we always say science is, I'm getting it down to proof. But some people say, as you were mentioning, there's faith in science. That seems like counterintuitive to what science is.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, let's deal with that word proof. Science should never use that word.
Okay.
People on TV claim they've proved this or that, in commercials. But science does not prove anything, because you can always come up with new evidence that says you're wrong. And there's one, the reason this is all important, because there's one part of science that almost nobody understands adequately. And that is how much scientists depend on a philosophy, on assumptions, which dominate and actually in many cases control their conclusions, especially when we're dealing with questions about ancient history, evolution, and geology.
Yeah.
Everybody has a worldview, a philosophy, whether they think about it or not. And in science, that philosophy in many ways controls conclusions, and that people will think, well, you're being radical. No, I'm not. That's exactly the way it is.
That's so interesting about the assumptions part. I had never thought of that, and it's so true. Rich, when you are out there and speaking to our young people, and obviously I'm sure you interact with some of the parents, do you ever get pushback? Do you ever get in what Leonard was responding to? That we as a church sometimes push away science.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of folks in the church that have this difference in their mind between the two. And it's kind of interesting because we usually, when I'll have a talk or a presentation or whatever, and I'm talking to kids and usually their parents are with them, the very first thing I'll do is I'll help them understand and establish what exactly is science. And just like Dr. Brand said, it doesn't mean it's automatically proof, but I show them right out of the dictionary, the definition of science is basically seeking knowledge. But in order to seek knowledge, you have to have two qualifications, which is to be able to observe it and to be able to experiment and provide, some sort of physical evidence. So, for shortcut for kids to remember, I say, see it and test it. Then you're starting to understand some knowledge there. Still not proof, but it's the beginning. And that helps them also, I think, understand that, knowledge is kind of like, these glasses kind of that Dr. Brand's talking about is which pair of glasses are you looking through to see the universe? Because if you do have kind of a pre-existing view, even if you're having, looking at the same thing, you're going to see things differently if you have that pre-existing, set of information in your brain. So I try to set it up, first of all, like, hey, let's clear the slate. And first of all, understand what exactly science is. And then we apply what we're seeing in the world to that. And hopefully that provides a little bit more clarity. And I've discovered a lot of parents out there are, intrigued by that approach because it helps them kind of get over what their pre-existing views are and say, okay, let's even the playing field here.
And those different glasses, that's not theoretical. That's very practical. My friends and I do research in geology as well as paleontology, and we go out and look at the rocks, and everybody looks at the same rocks. If you know in your mind that these took millions of years to form, you see that you see the rocks that way. And we find if we let the Bible open our minds to think about various options, we look at those same rocks and we see things that they're not noticing that are really misleading them. And so that changes the whole picture that you wouldn't have expected before.
That assumption that you mentioned, Dr. Brand, a lot of it is just faith, basically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting how in the scientific world they'll use the word assumption, but what they're describing is faith, and that gives me a different point of view, because I know for one question that I get a lot, or one fear that I hear. I used to work at a university, and I would get parents that would say, my child wants to study science, but I'm afraid it's going to draw them away from their faith. It's going to take them away, because Rich, you mentioned, I show them this is what science is. And some parents say that's great, but I still fear it's going to take them away. How do we address that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Of course, we all raise our children with the hopes that they will use the Bible as their pair of glasses, because that, at the end of the day, that's kind of what leads the charge, is which pair of glasses are they looking at? Of course, as Christians, we're using the Bible as our pair of glasses. So, you put on the glasses and then you look at science and then you see if it's kind of matching up. And, the other side is going to do the same thing. They're going to put the glasses on and look at science and seeing the knowledge that's being gained and see if it matches up. When you have tons of holes and tons of problems, and that should be a red flag. Of course, I believe that the Bible lines up with faith. And, that's why you push back on this idea that you hear a lot of people saying that there's this conflict between, the two, and there's not. And a classic example, I also go around, when I'm talking to kids, and, I talk a lot about the flood, the story of the flood, which is great because, it doesn't matter which glasses you put on. Clearly, there's just a colossal amount of evidence for, the catastrophism and all the erosion, and, that all land mass is covered with water at some point or another. But then there's the difference. You put on the glasses and do you see the Bible narrative, which of course the Bible is the most accurate historical source document ever, or do you come, and follow these ideas which are based on humans' guesses about what we think could have happened or how it could have happened? Well, I choose. And that's where the faith part comes in. I choose to believe in God's word and use that as my glasses to see the world. And then when I look through those pair of glasses, the word, and I look at nature and I look at science, it's great because I see it matching up. And that's a huge faith build.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those parents' concern is very real, because a person who who knows all this evidence, they can make a very convincing sounding explanation. And you can't really see what's wrong with it unless you have had a chance to see the other side. And that's why I write in ways to try to help people to see a different picture.
The other side, do you mean the other point of views?
Right. The other point, a point of view that can fit with the Bible. There is a very good series of explanations that fit with the Bible, but you'll never hear them from most scientists. And unless the kids hear that side, the other one can sound so convincing they don't know what to do.
It's interesting too, because you almost are required to teach both sides, because in the church, you're going to have families which have never heard the evolutionary side. And then what happens when all those kids hit their teens and are young adults, and then suddenly they're whacked with all this evidence, and everywhere in the culture is talking about one thing. So I kind of believe that it's educating them on both sides, making them aware of both sides of the argument, and then presenting your case as to why you believe in this side, why I believe in God's word, and why I believe in the creation side of the angle. So I kind of think it actually works both ways.
Yeah.
I agree with you entirely. If they don't see that you know the other side and are willing to share it and compare, then they won't know what to think about what you're saying.
So we should not be afraid to dive into both sides or the various sides, because there is an element of, as you mentioned, Rich, there could be some faith growing there. And there's also an element of just being understood, or having a sense of like, okay, this person knows both sides. They're not just forcing me to one side.
Right.
I think that's very important. So how, as a church, can we embrace science? Because it would be almost, I would see, counterintuitive. I don't want to use counterintuitive, but if someone says, I'm going to present to you evolution on this Sabbath, they say, wait a second. So how do we embrace science? Do we present it as something that is going to build our faith?
It's something we need to know about. And so, like when I give talks, I don't say, I'm going to teach you evolution. No, I give the topic that I'm talking about, and then I will discuss these different points of view and try to help the hearers see why it's better, why you come out better if you take the Bible seriously.
That's good. Rich, do you agree with the approach of, again, you're doing all these presentations, and have you ever gotten an asked to do a presentation and they kind of misconstrued what you were actually trying to present?
Yeah. I've as you can imagine, as you travel around, you meet all sorts of people, and I don't have a problem with it, because every person is in their own place on the subject, farther along, less far along, cynical, innocent, naive. But I at the same time, when you're having this discussion with folks, I try to make it clear that neither side really is 1,000% airtight. And one of the concepts that I always tell when I'm talking about the evolutionary side of the argument is that you actually have to have a lot of faith to believe in evolution. A lot of people think it's like some sort of airtight argument, and there's science just piled up with it, but there's a massive amount of holes and problems that nobody seems to want to talk about, because the popular culture is not going to talk about them or admit them. And of course, believing in God and believing in the Bible also is a faith based system. So, you do have to, you can't just, sugarcoat everything and this is a slam dunk. and as long as they know that, hey, this is an honest, we're trying to find out the truth, we're trying to figure out what's the history and how and where we came from and all that kind of stuff, but helping them at the same time understand that it's not airtight, but we choose to make a personal choice of what you believe in. That at the end of the day, that's kind of what it has to come down to.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now let me ask you this. We have, now that the more we're talking about this, we titled this in depth, religion versus science. But would it be fair to say religion and science, or faith and science? Meaning these two can go hand in hand. And diving into a little bit more of what you're saying, Rich, how do we show that science is part of faith building? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think our culture is different now than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago, where, here's what it is, and you just believe it and kind of go with it. Our current generation of young people, that's not enough. They want to see more. They demand some kind of, clues, evidence, proof, whatever you want to call it. And ideally, having science backing it up is very powerful for their perspective.
Sure.
So, when I'm talking to kids, we'll bring in some intelligent design, which shows how nature is so incredibly and irreducibly complex. And, you contrast that with a universe that supposedly just kind of formed itself and just kind of exploded into existence, or, this slime evolved into a frog and then an ape and whatever, kind of random and haphazardly. And then you contrast that with the incredible amount of detail and structure in a strand of DNA. So you can use science to kind of build your case and show them that, order has to be designed. I mean,
sure.
I keep this mousetrap on my desk as a reminder, and I use it in my presentations too, because, a mousetrap is a machine.
Yeah.
Nobody would argue that a mousetrap evolved. Somebody had to design it. So anytime you see a machine, any kind of thing that's functioning or doing, and that would include organically speaking, it's hard to justify how that could have just happened by itself. It's like, throwing up a bunch of blocks and they all come down in order. It's just, random is not a scientific explanation for intelligent things that and design and stuff that we see in nature and all around us.
Absolutely.
And then the points you're making in biology have become stronger, much stronger in recent years. It's just incredible what's being discovered. This is really not the argument. The question about evolution is really not Christians versus scientists anymore. There are aspects in science. People who don't believe in creation are recognizing that Darwin's theory simply cannot work from what we know about what's happening in the cell. And so it's a new day really for those who believe in creation in terms of biology. It just, the evidence is becoming overwhelming. In geology, it's a bit more of a challenge, but we're finding more and more things, even in geology, that make it difficult to accept the standard view. And there are many things, like you say, that we don't understand. We have to be candid about that.
Now, Dr. Brand, I'm glad we're touching on creation and evolution. We're getting a little bit more in depth when it comes to the science and religion debate or conversation, if you will. Dr. Brand, you yourself have written a book entitled "Creation? Really? So I wanted to ask you this, as a lay person that's not in geology or paleontology or something, or those sciences, which a lot of our churches are, where do we begin with this search? Where do we, instead of just saying, oh, I just believe it, but I want to dig a little bit more, how do we approach it? Again, with the background of all the different fears that we may have when we're jumping into science.
Well, how do we approach it? You're asking, what do we start? Where do we start? What part of the topic do we start with?
Yeah, as a lay person, as someone that is not as in depth with you, that doesn't know all the technical terms.
Okay. Well, in that book you mentioned, I start out with an argument that I think is very important, a question that I think is very important. How did life begin? That's a part of the whole evolution question. How do you go from non-living to living? And all the books and articles you'll read about this describe a non-creation process. Okay, and this is very uniformly accepted, no question. But the question is, how much evidence is there for that? And the answer is zero.
Okay.
All the evidence is against it. And so if that's true, how can it be they're so sure? And this is the best illustration to me of this role of assumptions of philosophy. If they were to think that you might need to have a creator to start life, they've lost. Their philosophy is lost. They cannot do that. And so I asked myself, okay, what other areas are there in science where this philosophy is having that same role? And so I don't know where we start with kids. I mean, if you have a chance to give repeated discussions, that's best. But starting with something like that and help them to see that science is real, science is important, but there's faith and uncertainty involved from all sides of this question.
So when it comes to this faith issue, and it comes to creation, again, we get a lot of questions all the time. And as Rich mentioned earlier, with the society, it's just bombarding us with saying this is the proof of creation is not real. And, especially a lot of our young people just bombarded with what society is telling them. How can they have faith in what they're hearing at church, if you will, or from those in the faith, that they can move forward in this belief, even though they're hearing all around them that this is not true?
I guess it's necessary to bring people as you can, Rich or others who know the science, who know the evidence, to share in a way they'll show them we're not just talking. We know something about the evidence, and we know how it's being explained by others, and what alternative there is for how to explain it. I mean, we're ready to answer their questions and not to overwhelm them, but answer their questions, expose another side to them.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to evolution and creation, we tend to I've had some conversation with some people that say, oh, I believe in creation, but I also believe in evolution, from the standpoint that I see things evolving in front of me. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, it depends on how you use it, but there's this the thing called microevolution.
Yes.
Changes that we can observe happening, changes that have been going on since creation, and that's very real. There are changes that occur all around us, and they don't happen fast enough for us to see them so much. But that part is real, and that can make changes up to, say, a new species, maybe even a new genus of animals. And when you're talking about that level of biological change, you don't have to invent any new genes, any new organ systems. You're just modifying what's there. The other part is macroevolution. That's the large-scale evolution, the idea that you're going to get mammals and reptiles and fruit trees all from a common source. But that's the part that even some non-creationist scientists are recognizing does not work. The theory to do that doesn't work. And so this is an important distinction.
Okay. Oh, it looks like we had lost Rich there for a second. Rich, welcome back. I'm not sure if you heard what we were talking about. We're talking a little bit more about the evolution versus creation. And I had mentioned that I know some people that have said, I am a creationist. I believe in creation, but I also believe in evolution. And Dr. Brand very articulately described how there is the micro side of evolution that over time we see, but the macro, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Brand, the macro, even non-creation scientists realize that there's no really proof or evidence for that. Is this something? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
There's a group of them who are recognizing it, especially molecular biologists. But the mainstream evolutionary biologists will insist that they've got it all figured out.
Gotcha. Okay. Rich, welcome back again. I thought we had lost you there for a second.
You did.
But for yourself, as I grew up where a lot of times you talk a lot about dinosaurs, as you mentioned when we first started this conversation. And when I was growing up, dinosaurs wasn't really a topic discussed in church. It was kind of like, I don't know, do we believe in that or do we not? Where has this change started to happen? How do you present it when it comes to your presentations?
Yeah, well, first thing I noticed, even since I was a kid, every kid loves dinosaurs. And then, like you said, when we were kind of growing up, it seemed like it was one of those topics that you just kind of sweep under the rug and don't talk about it. And when I started, this part of our ministry work, I was like, actually, that's really destructive.
Okay.
Because, whenever a subject comes up and as a Christian household and you don't want to talk about it, that is really sending a strong signal to our kids that there is a massive problem, that there is doubt. So right off the bat, I said, we got to tackle this. We got to blow this open, and we may not have every single answer, but we got to talk about it. We can't afford to not talk about it. Too dangerous, because all that does is just, like I said, creates this doubt, which grows, and, there's reports that, say that its critical age is about 12, 13, that, right there. If you don't got their questions basically answered, they're gone. It's just a matter of time. It may not be till they're 18 or 20 or whatever, but if you cannot get them convicted by 13, they're gone. So that's where then, okay, what are the areas that they're interested in? And it brings us full circle back to dinosaurs. And I've actually done a lot of work and teaching and videos and stuff on the dinosaur topic, because I discovered that it's like an automatic, really exciting topic that is easy to lead back to the creation evolution topic, which is at the end of the day, the foundation of what I'm trying to teach and communicate. So again, it's kind of this approach of, let's look at science. Let's look at logic. Let's look at the Bible. Let's look at history. I taught my kids since, little, kind of playing chess, and the illustration that you got to position all your pieces and move strategically, not just, one piece recklessly. So I've always kind of appreciated a more, wide stance of, hey, let's look at this. Let's look at this. Does this match up with this? Do these things overlap? Is there a conflict here? And it's kind of cool, because when you look at things like history or literature or simple logic or science or the Bible, and you plug it into this dinosaur topic, you'll see that in many cases, it all kind of lines up nicely. Problem is, historically, the church doesn't want to talk about it too much.
Yeah, that's where we run in. Dr. Brand.
It's kind of cool that one of the richest dinosaur quarries in the world is being operated by creationists.
Really?
Art Chadwick and his crew, they're on this quarry every summer with a lot of volunteers, and they're publishing scientific articles on it. It's a really exciting project.
Wow, that is exciting.
I've been to that dig twice, and it is really cool and exciting seeing, being in person there. But I mean, you're digging up and just, you're there a day and you're already seeing evidence that, links with the Bible. For example, when you're finding the bones there, you're finding them in a graded bed, which is really cool, because it's saying that basically these creatures died somewhere else, got mangled up, and came to this low spot and rested, and all the bones articulated, then just kind of sorted themselves, little ones on the bottom, big ones on the bottom, medium and small. And, it just neatly ties back to the concept of a global flood. So it's pretty cool. Like Dr. Brand was saying, to have this dig site that operates every summer, and they're pulling out just hundreds and hundreds of bones.
Now, where's the site?
It's in Wyoming, north Wyoming.
Wyoming.
It's interesting that the ranchers, Christian ranchers who own this place, that they had another scientist coming, was studying the dinosaur bones, and they asked, he's from a university, and they said, you can keep doing this research if you will discuss creation along with evolution with your students.
Really?
He left and he said, I'm sorry, this is the last science will ever be done here on this ranch.
Really?
But now, of course, as Rich was describing, it's it's being somewhat reluctantly recognize this is one of the best run and best documented dinosaur quarries anywhere.
Wow, that's fantastic. I had not heard of that. I'm going to dig a little bit more. But actually, you guys got onto a topic that I'm wanting to ask you about, and that is every now and then, I'll check my news, and there's always something, dinosaur bones discovered, or dinosaur bone discovered, and my Christian upbringing wants me to like skip that news article and say, oh no, this is going to go against my faith, because the article inadvertently will always talk about how old the bones are. So just in what you described, Rich, it made me think a little bit. But again, how do it makes it feel like there's this faith versus science battle again when I come across these articles, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one in our church that comes across these type of things. So how can I shift my mindset into, when I see these articles, kind of be excited about it and not say, oh no, this is going against my faith?
Yeah, for sure. And Dr. Brand could probably answer this better, but one of the things that I tell the kids, and even my own kids, I have 2 teenagers now, and they've kind of grown up around me, kind of always challenging them to read between the lines. Funny stuff too, every time they see millions of years, I always tell them millions of seconds, but something like, you see you probably heard reports of, dinosaur bones that have been found now with, soft tissues attached to them, or, blood vessels and, cells and stuff like that, organic, semi-organic, I'm not exactly sure, but little clues like that. And of course, the evolutionary scientific community immediately is backpedaling and almost panicking or trying to cover it up or something. But these little kind of clues, I'm like, okay, it wouldn't be terribly surprising to find these if they indeed were, buried there 400 to 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whenever the flood was. It would kind of make sense if we're finding stuff that's half decomposed. I mean, how could it be preserved, for millions of years and still finding some kind of, organic stuff in there or whatever. But, you look around and you look at the version that's being offered in the article, but then when you read between the lines, it totally usually matches up with a biblical narrative as well, which is kind of cool. And then you back up scientifically and you're like, yeah, that kind of works this way too. So it's a matter, I think, of exposing and kind of training yourself to, like I said, read between the lines and see that there is always a flip side of that coin.
Yeah, reading between the lines is a good way to describe it. Or you can say you need to learn to translate the science, recognize what it is that they are assuming and what it is that they probably have evidence for.
That's great. What are they assuming? Yeah, because I know for me, my Christian upbringing just makes me say, move along. Let's go on to the next one. But I appreciate how both of you are saying, no, let's engage with this conversation. Let's engage with this article, if you will, and kind of read between the lines or the assumptions that are being included here.
And it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, where on the dinosaur topic in particular, 99.9% of the people out there are wearing the evolutionary glasses and seeing the evolutionary worldview relating to the dinosaurs. And there's that one guy out there with the biblical perspective that he's trying to see it through the biblical lens. But the nice thing is, it seems like there's more and more biblical and Christian creationists coming, scientists coming forward and like we're talking about, looking at it through the other pair of glasses. And I think a lot of people are being alarmed and surprised that it actually matches up pretty nicely in favor of the Bible.
Some of us go to every year to the annual meetings of the Geological Society of America. That's a huge meeting of geologists, and let's say 15 years ago there would be 3 or 4 of us there, truly Bible believers who believe in recent creation. But our graduate programs are putting out more and more, and now it's cool. Sometimes we got 50. I mean, these things are changing. We put out graduate students, and they go out and teach students, and 2 of those have started their own Christian geology programs, Bible based, and now they're putting out students, sending them back here for PhDs. and it's changing. It really is changing. It's very satisfying to see that. That's one of the things we have to do. Get teachers out there who know how to present this, who know what's going on.
That's great. So you are encouraging more and more young Christians to get involved with this, to not be afraid of diving into this.
Absolutely.
That's important. Right? You don't hide from it.
That's great. I know for me,
you're saying you just kind of skip over it. That's the instinct, but we have to resist that.
Yeah, there's that instinct of wanting to skip over it, and then there's the instinct. I know I've had conversations where some religious or Bible-believing people, they just give me the bullet points so that I can prove others wrong, so I can prove those non-creationists wrong. I always had a little bit uneasiness with that because I don't think that's an approach that we want to have either towards this.
A graduate student a few years ago asked me to describe to him the best arguments to use to win an argument over creation. And I told him, none. Take the wrong approach. You first of all need to become their friend.
Okay.
Then when they're ready to ask questions, you be ready to answer the question. And it really works. I've been out in the field with a geologist that I got to know pretty well. He's an atheist, and he and I have argued in the literature about certain explanations, and but we became friends. We had delightful conversations, because we become friends.
There's a lot, especially in the past, a lot of these debates and stuff that have been recorded or whatever, which is it's sad, almost embarrassing, because then you're getting these creationists which are like hostile and angry, and we have to remember that while we're engaging people with this topic, that we still have the responsibility of having a Christian spirit in how we address people and how we talk about it, and being sensitive also to people. This is all they've known for their whole lives, and then all of a sudden you throw this at them, they're going to resist, they're going to be confused, they may be hostile, but I've seen it way too many times where this subject comes up and it's a fist fight practically. And that gets dangerous, because then it's totally going down the wrong road.
Absolutely.
The geologist I mentioned, we came to the point where we had confidence, we respected each other's science, and he started asking questions like, what is salvation? What is faith? What is heaven and hell?
And that wouldn't have come up if you guys would have been strangling each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he'd ask that of a pastor, unfortunately, but we can get to know them and get insights.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let me throw in there really quick too. I think there's a lot of church folks out there that think that this particular point is a salvation issue, but it's not.
Gotcha.
And it's something that helps us to see the big picture, but sometimes people, treat it in such a way that it's life and death. And it is important, absolutely, because I've dedicated my life to this, so I believe it's important. But we have to just kind of remember to not lose focus on what the real prize is, and that's accepting Jesus. And of course, part of that comes with understanding who he is and the background of the story, and that's kind of what this topic is about.
Absolutely.
And God hasn't asked us to make salvation decisions, but there are I know friends who have given up on the Bible and give up on God because of the science, and that's unfortunate. But they made that choice. But I told this geologist, and not everybody's going to agree with this, but I said I think there are atheists, people who think they are atheists because they've abandoned, that they've rejected a false view of God that's been given to them. The Holy Spirit speaks to each person, no matter where they are.
Yes.
And and it's important how they decide, even if they can't understand everything. That's fine.
Yeah.
If they accept what they can understand about at least being kind to people and whatever, I mean, that makes a huge difference.
Yes, I can't agree more with the description that you just gave, Dr. Rana, and Rich as well, about that connection with other people, that relationship building. This is not an argument, and I think that's why we, again, going back to, we said religion versus science, but this is just, we're here in this conversation. We want to build these friendships, as you mentioned, Dr. Brand, and just imagining you speaking with this other scientist. I can't imagine the depths that you guys went into, but I'm so happy how you described, and then he started asking about salvation, and then he started asking about heaven. And when we think about it from a faith point of view, that is our goal. That is so beautiful to hear, that science got you to that point.
And if we had a couple more hours, I could tell you many stories. But
I'm sure you could. I'm
our
sure.
research in Peru on fossil whales, we worked with a Peruvian paleontologist. I don't think he has any training in theology, but he's become a dear friend, and I want to see him in heaven. And there's reason to think, he's going in that direction.
Amen. And Rich, with realizing that this is not a salvation issue, I think we as a church sometimes get caught up in that, and a lot of times that's where this emotion comes from, and then this argumentative spirit comes from. But I can totally appreciate with what you're saying. That is not the point, and then we just lose people with it. Yeah. So I think as a church, we've got to remember, I can have the right point, but I've lost the soul of the person.
Right.
And I don't know what.
And when we have to remind ourselves, because a lot of people will be very passionate about this topic, that our job is to deliver the truth based on the Bible. It's not our job to convert them. It's not our job to save them. And think about it. How better of a job are we going to do connecting with somebody at that level if we're hostile with them, and if we're arguing with them, or we're fighting with them? All we can do is do it in a spirit of love and a desire to help them understand the truth as we see it from the Bible. And then we literally, and this is the hardest part, I think, is you just have to hand it off to the Holy Spirit and said, because the Holy Spirit's the one that's going to do the work, the heavy lifting. Yeah. We're just the delivery method. And so think, if you want people to be receptive to an idea, how's your delivery method have to be? Is it pounding them on the head with a hammer, or like Dr. Brand said, with love and friendship and compassion? It's going to be a lot more successful, even though it is a topic that inherently just seems like it's just full of anger and conflict and fighting.
Yeah, my career is pretty much devoted to this, using my faith to help me to understand the science. I like to summarize it this way: our religion is not based on science. It's based on faith in God. But God has been using science recently to bring more and more evidence to encourage us. That's pretty exciting.
That is exciting. This has been a great conversation. I just want to leave everyone with one final thought. And, we started this conversation on religion versus science, or faith versus science. And I just love how we've come around to how science can not only increase our faith, as you just mentioned, Dr. Brand, but it can also engage others to the point where now we're talking about faith with them. One last thing, if you would like to share with us, Rich and Dr. Brand, words of encouragement for those people who are struggling with their faith right now when it comes to science, because they're seeing evidence, they're seeing in their mind, this proves everything that I thought was correct wrong. We want to leave them with words of encouragement. What can we tell them?
Go ahead.
Well, for me, it's a journey, of course. And like Dr. Brand was saying, it is really cool to see that there's more and more of the scientific community and coming out, if I can say that, and standing up for the biblical scientific view. And I would say that's very encouraging, because even just in the last 10 years, the amount of strides with creation science, dedicated, PhDs and doctors out there just uncovering more and more information. Anybody that discovers and sees that, I think the trend is definitely upward for providing more and more evidence that helps to build our faith, that alone is really encouraging, especially for this particular generation, as they're looking to kind of see a balance between what they believe and what science teaches.
Great.
I would second that. Just encourage people to realize that what science is telling you right now on a certain point may change in 10 years. Don't put too much confidence in the details of what science tells us. Science is very important, fantastic way to search for understanding, but it changes, and who knows this better? God, who has seen it all, or us as scientists who have seen a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to both of you. Again, I want to remind our viewers, if you want to learn more about what our friend here, Rich, is doing, his website is onemustardseed.com or org?
.com.
onemustardseed.com, and you can engage with what he is doing in spreading this information all different parts of the world. Hop on that and check it out. And also with Dr. Brand, you can check out his book, Creation Really, and there's different places that you can check that out. Again, I want to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. We hope those of you that have been watching that you've truly enjoyed, and we hope to see you again next time. Thanks again.